Tonight, we are going to strip away the romantic fantasy of the cozy medieval tavern you have seen in movies and books, and instead, we are going to reveal the true experience of weary travellers seeking shelter from the bitter cold in an age before comfortable hotels or reliable roads. We will explore the reality of sharing straw beds with complete strangers, the thick smoke that filled every room, and the strange rituals that accompanied a night spent at a roadside inn after dark. This is a journey into the past, into the ordinary and extraordinary world of medieval travel, where a simple bed for the night was never quite as simple as it sounds. Before we step out of the cold and into history together, if you're enjoying settling in for the night with a bit of boring history, consider hitting subscribe. And I'm curious, where in the world are you listening from right now? And what time is it there? Drop it in the comments. I love seeing how far these sleepy stories travel. Now, settle in, let your body relax, and allow me to guide you backward through time. Close your eyes if you wish, and imagine yourself as a traveller on a muddy road in the year 1350, somewhere in the English countryside. The light is fading, the temperature is dropping, and somewhere ahead you can see a faint glow of firelight through the trees. You are about to experience something that millions of people experienced throughout the medieval period. You are about to spend a night at a medieval inn. Let us begin with the journey itself, because to truly understand the medieval inn, you must first understand why it existed in the first place, and what drove people to seek its shelter with such desperate gratitude. Picture yourself walking along a medieval road. Now, the word road might conjure images of smooth pavement, but in this time, most roads were simply beaten paths of packed earth that turned to thick mud after any rainfall. In some places, the road might be paved with old Roman stones, worn smooth by centuries of footsteps and cartwheels. But in most places, you would be walking through ruts and puddles, your shoes caked with mud, your clothes damp from the mist that seems to hang perpetually over the countryside. You have been walking since before dawn. This was the way of medieval travel. People rose before the sun appeared and set out immediately, hoping to cover as much ground as possible while daylight lasted. There were no streetlights. There were no reliable maps. And once darkness fell, travel became not just difficult but genuinely dangerous. The dangers were many. First, there were the physical hazards of the road itself. A twisted ankle in the dark could leave you stranded and helpless. A wrong turn might lead you into a ditch, a swamp, or off a low bridge into frigid water. The medieval countryside was not the manicured landscape of today. It was wild, overgrown, and treacherous in the darkness. Then there were the human dangers. The medieval forest was home to outlaws, bandits, and desperate men who had fled the law and now lived by robbing unwary travellers. These were not the romantic outlaws of legend. These were often violent, hungry men who would kill for a pair of shoes or a few coins. Travelling alone at night was considered so foolish that courts of law sometimes used it as evidence of suicidal intent. And so, as the light began to fade each afternoon, travellers became increasingly anxious. They watched the sun with growing concern. They quickened their pace. They asked fellow travellers about the distance to the next settlement, the next village, the next inn where they might find shelter. This is the state of mind you must understand. When a medieval traveller saw the glow of an inn appearing through the evening gloom, they did not feel mild interest or casual curiosity. They felt profound relief. They felt gratitude. They felt, quite literally, that they had been saved from a night of genuine peril. This feeling is difficult for us to understand today, when we can drive through the night on well-lit highways, when we can pull out our phones and find the nearest hotel in seconds. But imagine, if you can, the relief of that medieval traveller. Imagine the weight lifting from their shoulders as they saw that distant firelight. Imagine the way their tired legs found new energy for these last few hundred steps toward warmth and safety. This relief is essential to understanding everything that happened inside the medieval inn. It explains why travelers accepted conditions that we would find intolerable. It explains why they paid prices that were sometimes outrageously high. It explains why they followed strange rules and customs without complaint. The alternative was the dark, cold, dangerous road. And compared to that alternative, almost anything was acceptable. Now, let us approach this inn more closely. Let us examine what a traveller would see as they finally reached their destination. The first thing they would notice, often from a considerable distance, was the ale stake. This was a long pole that jutted out horizontally from the front of the building, and from this pole hung a bush of dried leaves or greenery. This bush was the universal sign of a medieval inn. It told travellers that here they could buy ale and usually find a bed for the night. The ale stake is an interesting piece of medieval inn history that reveals much about how these establishments operated. In an age when most people could not read, visual signs were essential for communication. A bush hanging from a pole meant ale. A striped pole meant a barber. A golden key might mean a locksmith. These simple symbols allowed even the most uneducated traveller to find what they needed. The size and freshness of the bush also communicated important information. A large, recently replaced bush suggested that the inn had just brewed a fresh batch of ale. A small, withered bush might suggest that the ale was old, weak, or that the inn was struggling to attract customers. Experienced travellers learned to read these signs and choose their accommodations accordingly. Approaching the inn, our traveller would also notice the building itself. Now, this is where we must sweep away some romantic misconceptions. In many films and television shows, medieval inns are depicted as large, picturesque buildings with multiple stories, painted signs, and welcoming windows glowing with light. Some inns were indeed grand establishments, particularly those on major pilgrimage routes or in wealthy market towns. But the typical roadside inn was a much more modest affair. Many inns were simply converted houses. A farmer's wife might set up a few barrels of ale and offer travellers a corner of the family home to sleep in. This type of informal inn was called an ale house, and they were found throughout the countryside. The building would look like any other peasant dwelling. It might be made of timber and wattle, with a thatched roof and small windows covered with oiled cloth rather than glass. Smoke would be rising from a central chimney or simply seeping through gaps in the thatch, as many buildings still had open hearths with no proper chimney at all. The more established inns, often found in towns or at important crossroads, were built more substantially. They might be constructed of stone, particularly in areas where stone was plentiful. They might have 2 stories, with the innkeeper's family living upstairs and the common room occupying the ground floor. Some had courtyards where horses and carts could be sheltered for the night. A few even had separate buildings for different purposes, including stables, kitchens, and sleeping quarters. But regardless of its size or construction, every medieval inn shared certain characteristics. It would be dark inside, lit only by the fire and perhaps a few tallow candles. It would be smoky, filled with the thick smell of wood smoke that soaked into everything. It would be crowded, filled with people seeking the same warmth and safety that our traveller sought. And it would be noisy, filled with conversation, laughter, arguments, and the general hubbub of many people confined in a small space. Our traveller pushes open the heavy wooden door. Immediately, they are enveloped by warmth. After hours of walking in the cold, this warmth feels almost physical, like stepping into a warm bath. The heat radiates from a large fireplace that dominates one wall of the room, where logs crackle and spark, sending dancing shadows across the rough timber walls. The smell hits them next. It is a complex mixture that the modern nose would find overwhelming. There is the thick smell of wood smoke, of course, which penetrates everything. There is the smell of roasting meat, turning slowly on a spit over the fire. There is the yeasty smell of ale being brewed or served. There is the smell of wet wool as cloaks and clothing dry by the fire. There is the smell of the travellers themselves, who have not bathed in days or weeks, and whose bodies carry the earthy, musky odour of hard travel. To a modern person, this combination of smells might be unpleasant, but to our medieval traveller, it is the smell of safety and comfort. It is the smell of a full belly, a warm fire, and a roof over their head. It is the smell of survival. And after the cold, wet, dangerous road, it is one of the most welcome smells in the world. The common room is crowded. Around the fire sit perhaps a dozen people, all seeking the same warmth. Some are local villagers who have come for an evening of ale and gossip. Others are travellers like our protagonist, their faces tired and dirty from the road, their wet boots steaming as they dry by the fire. Near the fire, a dog is curled up, enjoying the warmth. Chickens might wander in and out of the room, as they often lived among people in this era. The boundaries between inside and outside, between human space and animal space, were far more fluid than we would expect today. Our traveller approaches the innkeeper. This person might be a man or a woman, as running an inn was one of the few trades open to women in the medieval period. Many inns were run by widows who needed to support themselves, or by wives whose husbands worked at other trades during the day. The innkeeper looks up from their work, assesses the new arrival with an experienced eye, and begins the ancient ritual of negotiation. Seeking a bed for the night, the traveller nods, too tired for elaborate conversation. Ale, food, again a nod. The innkeeper names a price. This is where things get interesting, because the cost of staying at a medieval inn varied enormously depending on many factors. What kind of inn was it? How busy was the night? How desperate did the traveller appear? How well dressed were they? All of these factors influenced the price. In general, a night at a basic inn might cost a penny or two, which sounds trivially cheap until you realise that a skilled labourer might earn only 4 or 5 pennies a day. A night's lodging, then, could consume a substantial portion of a worker's daily wage. For poorer travellers, this expense was a serious burden, and many people simply could not afford to stay at inns at all. They slept instead in barns, under hedges, or in the open air, wrapped in their cloaks and hoping for fair weather. Our traveller, let us say, is a merchant of modest means. They carry enough coin to afford a night's stay, and they agree to the innkeeper's price with only token negotiation. The innkeeper takes a few coins and gestures toward the fire. Our traveller gratefully takes their place among the other guests, finding a spot on a wooden bench near the warmth. And now, finally at rest, our traveller can observe their surroundings more carefully. This common room, this smoky, crowded, noisy space, will be their home for the next 12 hours or so. Let us examine it together in careful detail. The walls are made of timber, rough-hewn and darkened by years of smoke. In places, you can see the wattle and daub construction beneath, where sticks have been woven together and covered with a mixture of mud, straw, and sometimes animal dung. This construction method was cheap and effective, providing decent insulation while being easily repaired when damaged. The walls are not straight by modern standards. They bulge and curve in places, following the natural shape of the timbers and the imprecise methods of medieval construction. The floor is covered with rushes. This is a type of flooring that has completely disappeared from modern life, and it is worth pausing to describe. Throughout the medieval period, most floors were simply packed earth, bare dirt, in other words. To make this flooring more comfortable and to help with cleanliness, people would spread dried rushes across the floor. These long, dried plants created a carpet of sorts, soft underfoot and capable of absorbing spills and dirt. The rushes in this inn have been down for some time. Fresh rushes would be greenish gold in colour and would smell pleasant, like newly mown hay. But these rushes are old and dirty. They have been walked upon by countless feet, have absorbed spilled ale and food scraps, and have probably provided shelter to various insects and small creatures. The smell that rises from them is not unpleasant exactly, but it is distinctly organic, a mixture of dried plants, old beer, and things best left unexamined. In wealthier establishments, the rushes might be mixed with fragrant herbs like lavender, rosemary, or mint to help mask less pleasant odours. Some innkeepers changed their rushes weekly or even more frequently. Others, less conscientious or less prosperous, might leave the same rushes down for months until they became so dirty and compressed that they resembled a thick mat of organic material rather than individual plants. The ceiling of the common room is low, barely high enough for a tall man to stand upright. This low ceiling served a practical purpose. A small, low room is much easier to heat than a large, high-ceilinged one. And in an age when heat was precious and expensive, people built their homes accordingly. The beams that support the ceiling are blackened with soot from countless fires, and from these beams hang various objects, a few lanterns perhaps, bunches of dried herbs, strings of onions, a side of bacon, slowly smoking and curing in the warmth rising from the fire. The furniture is simple and sturdy. There are wooden benches along the walls, worn smooth by generations of use. There are a few wooden tables, their surfaces stained and scarred by countless meals. There might be a few three-legged stools, which had an advantage over four-legged furniture in that they did not wobble on uneven floors. Everything is functional rather than decorative. The concept of furniture as aesthetic objects, as things to be admired as well as used, was largely limited to the wealthy classes. The fireplace is the heart of the room, both literally and figuratively. It dominates one entire wall, a great opening of stone or brick where massive logs burn slowly, creating a steady, reliable heat. Above the fire hangs an iron pot, suspended from a chain in which something bubbles continuously. This is the inn's pottage, a thick stew that serves as the primary meal for most guests. To the side of the fire, a spit rotates slowly, turned by a small boy whose sole job is to keep the meat turning so it cooks evenly. The boy's face is flushed red from the heat, and he has clearly been at this task for hours. The firelight flickers across the room, creating dancing shadows on every surface. This is important to understand about medieval lighting. There was no steady, even illumination like we enjoy today. Every light source in the medieval world flickered. Candles flickered, oil lamps flickered, fires flickered. This meant that the visual world of the medieval person was in constant motion, full of shifting shadows and uncertain shapes. It must have created a very different psychological experience than our modern world of stable, electric light. Supplementing the firelight are a few tallow candles placed around the room. Tallow candles were made from animal fat, usually beef or mutton, and they were the standard form of artificial light for most people in the medieval period. They were cheap to make, but had significant drawbacks. They burned with a dim, yellowish light. They produced a great deal of smoke and soot, and they smelled, sometimes quite strongly, of rendered animal fat. Wealthier people used beeswax candles, which burned brighter, cleaner, and with a pleasant honey scent. But beeswax was expensive, and in a roadside inn, tallow was the standard. As our travellers' eyes adjust to the dim, flickering light, they begin to observe their fellow guests more closely. The common room is home to a remarkable diversity of people, all brought together by the simple need for shelter on this cold night. Near the fire sits a group of merchants, recognizable by their somewhat better quality clothing and their animated discussion of prices and markets. They are travelling together for safety, as merchants often did, and they will continue their journey together in the morning. Their bundles and bags are piled around them, kept close for fear of theft. Even in the relative safety of an inn, you did not leave your possessions unattended. In one corner, a hooded figure sits alone, nursing a cup of ale and speaking to no one. This anonymous figure was a common sight in medieval inns. People travelled for many reasons, and not all of them wished to be identified or questioned. Perhaps this was a pilgrim who had taken a vow of silence. Perhaps it was a messenger carrying confidential documents. Perhaps it was someone fleeing from trouble in their home village, hoping to start fresh somewhere new. The other guests eye this figure with curiosity, but do not disturb their solitude. In the inn's common room, a certain amount of privacy was respected, even in the absence of physical privacy. Near the door, a group of farmers are engaged in loud conversation, their dialect thick and difficult for an outsider to understand. They are locals rather than travellers, men who have come to the inn for an evening of drinking and sociability. Their presence is common in medieval inns, which served as the social centres of their communities. The inn was where news was shared, where gossip was exchanged, where business deals were made, and where disputes were settled. It was, in many ways, the medieval equivalent of the town square, the coffee shop, and the community centre, all rolled into one. At another table, a pair of pilgrims sit quietly, their pilgrim badges visible on their cloaks. These small metal badges indicated that they had visited a holy site, usually a shrine containing the relics of a saint. Pilgrimage was an enormously popular activity in the medieval period, and pilgrims were a common sight on the roads and in the inns. They were afforded a certain amount of respect and charity, as their journey was considered a religious act. At the same time, not everyone who claimed to be a pilgrim was genuine. Some criminals and vagabonds adopted the appearance of pilgrims to gain sympathy and avoid suspicion. Innkeepers learned to be cautiously welcoming to pilgrims, neither refusing them hospitality nor extending unlimited trust. And scattered throughout the room are various other travellers. A young man who might be a student heading to one of the new universities that were beginning to emerge in this period. An older woman travelling with her daughter, perhaps to visit relatives in a distant town. A soldier with a scarred face, heading home after service in one of the many small wars that plagued the era. Each of these people has a story, a reason for being on the road, a destination they hope to reach. And tonight, all of these stories have converged in this smoky common room, where the fire crackles and the ale flows and the wind howls outside. This was the beauty of the medieval inn. It was a place where the rigid social hierarchies of the outside world were temporarily suspended. Knights might sit beside peasants. Merchants might share a table with monks. Rich and poor, young and old, local and foreign, all were brought together by the common human need for warmth and shelter. The inn was one of the few truly democratic spaces in the medieval world, a place where everyone, for a few coins, could find refuge from the night. The innkeeper moves through the room, refilling cups, checking on guests, maintaining the delicate social balance that kept the common room peaceful. This was a skilled job requiring considerable social intelligence. The innkeeper had to manage competing interests, diffuse tensions before they erupted into violence, and ensure that all guests felt welcome while also protecting their property and maintaining order. A good innkeeper was like a ship's captain, firmly in charge while also responsive to the needs of those in their care. Our traveller settles deeper into their seat, feeling the warmth of the fire gradually penetrating their chilled body. Their wet cloak is draped over a nearby bench, slowly drying. Their tired feet are stretched toward the flames. For the first time in many hours, they feel safe. They feel warm. They feel, for this moment at least, at peace. And this, perhaps, is the most important thing to understand about the medieval inn. Yes, it was smoky. Yes, it was crowded. Yes, it lacked privacy and comfort and cleanliness by modern standards. But it was also a haven. It was a place of refuge in a world that offered few refuges. It was a place where weary travellers could rest their bodies and quiet their fears, at least for one night, before facing the road again. As the night deepens and the fire settles into a steady glow, let us continue our exploration of this fascinating place. Let us learn about what our traveller will eat, what they will drink, and how they will eventually find their way to bed. For there is much more to discover about this world, this relaxing history documentary of ordinary life in extraordinary times. The wind howls outside, the fire crackles within, and somewhere in the darkness a dog barks at something only it can sense. Our traveller is safe for now, warm and drowsy, their bellies soon to be filled with simple food. This is the reality of the medieval inn, far from fantasy but no less fascinating for its ordinariness. Let your eyes grow heavy, let your breathing slow, and let us continue our gentle journey through history together. Ale, bread, and pottage upon the wooden board. The hunger of a medieval traveller was a very different thing from the hunger we experience today. We moderns are rarely truly hungry. We might feel peckish, might fancy a snack, might look forward to dinner, but genuine, gnawing hunger, the kind that comes from hard physical labour with insufficient food, is something most of us have never experienced. Our traveller, on the other hand, has been walking for 10 or 12 hours. They set out before dawn with perhaps a piece of bread and some cheese in their pocket, and that meagre breakfast was consumed many hours ago. They have burned thousands of calories through the simple act of moving their body across miles of rough terrain. By the time they reach the inn, they are genuinely hungry, deeply hungry, hungry in a way that affects their thinking and their mood. This hunger shapes their relationship with the food they are about to receive. They are not going to be critical or demanding. They are not going to complain about presentation or variety. They are going to eat whatever is placed before them with gratitude and relief, just as they accepted the smoky, crowded common room as a haven from the dark road. Let us now examine what that food would actually be. The medieval inn did not offer a menu. The very concept of a menu, where diners choose from a list of prepared dishes, would have been incomprehensible to most medieval people. Instead, the inn offered whatever the innkeeper happened to have available that day. Usually, this meant 3 things available in various combinations and quantities throughout the day and night. The first and most fundamental food was bread. Bread was the foundation of the medieval diet, consumed at nearly every meal by nearly every person. The average medieval peasant might eat 2 or 3 pounds of bread every day, far more than we would consider normal. Bread provided the bulk of their calories and was considered essential to any meal. A meal without bread was barely considered a meal at all. The bread in a typical inn would be made from rye or barley rather than wheat. Wheat bread was a luxury associated with the wealthy and with special occasions. Most common people ate the darker, heavier breads made from less prestigious grains. These breads were dense and chewy, quite different from the soft, light loaves we are accustomed to. They also had a stronger, more complex flavour, slightly sour from the natural fermentation process and earthy from the whole grains. The bread might be fresh, baked that morning in the inn's own oven or purchased from a local baker, or it might be several days old, growing hard and stale. Hard bread was not wasted in the medieval period. Instead, it was used in various ways. It might be soaked in ale or broth to soften it. It might be toasted by the fire. It might be used as a trencher, a kind of edible plate on which other foods were served. In wealthy households, these bread trenchers were given to the poor after the meal, along with whatever juices and flavours they had absorbed. In an inn, you would likely eat your trencher yourself, savouring every calorie. The second universal food was pottage. This was the bubbling substance in the pot, hanging over every medieval fire, and it was the staple hot meal of the common people. Pottage was essentially a thick soup or stew, though these modern terms do not quite capture its importance in the medieval diet. A basic pottage was made from whatever vegetables were available, cooked slowly in water until they broke down into a thick, nourishing mass. Cabbage, onions, leeks, peas, beans, carrots, turnips, and various greens might all find their way into the pottage pot. The exact composition varied by season, by region, and by what the cook happened to have on hand. In spring, fresh young greens might predominate. In winter, the pottage might be made largely from stored roots and dried peas. The pottage pot in many households was never emptied or cleaned. New ingredients were added each day, and the mixture was kept at a constant simmer on the fire. This meant that the pottage developed complex, layered flavours as ingredients added days or weeks apart mingled together. It also meant that the pot accumulated various objects that fell into it by accident, from bits of soot to the occasional insect. Medieval people were far less concerned about such contaminations than we would be. Food was precious, and a few impurities were simply ignored or eaten without comment. The pottage served in an inn might be thicker and more generous than what a poor family would eat at home. The innkeeper had an incentive to provide satisfying food, as their reputation depended on keeping travellers happy. The inn's pottage might include substantial amounts of barley or oats to make it more filling. It might be flavoured with herbs from the garden or bits of bacon for additional richness. It was served in wooden bowls, and you would eat it with a spoon if you had one, or simply drink it directly from the bowl. The third staple food was meat, though this was not always available and often cost extra. The rotating spit over the fire suggested that this inn had some meat to offer, and indeed, many inns took pride in their roasted meats. The type of meat varied enormously depending on location, season, and price. Pork was the most common meat in the medieval diet. Pigs were efficient converters of scraps and waste into edible protein, and they could be raised even by poor families. A roast pork joint, crackling with fat and dripping juices into the fire, was a common and beloved sight in medieval inns. Beef was rarer and more expensive, associated with special occasions. Mutton from sheep was common in some regions. Chicken and other poultry were available but often reserved for the sick, as their light flesh was considered easy to digest. Game meats like venison and wild boar were technically reserved for the nobility, as hunting rights were strictly controlled in medieval society. However, poached game sometimes found its way into inn kitchens, and no one asked too many questions about where the meat had come from. A traveller who ordered meat, without specifying further, might receive anything from rabbit to hare to pigeon to something more exotic and legally questionable. Fish was important as well, particularly on the many days when the church prohibited the eating of meat. Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday were all fish days for much of the medieval period, as were the 40 days of Lent and various other holy seasons. This meant that inns needed to maintain a supply of fish, which might be fresh from local rivers or preserved through salting, smoking, or drying. Salted herring was particularly common, cheap enough for the poorest travellers and available year-round. The innkeeper in our inn approaches our traveller and their fellow guests with bowls of steaming pottage. The thick, brownish mixture smells of onions and cabbage and something indefinably meaty, perhaps from the bones that were simmered in the pot to add richness. Alongside the pottage comes a chunk of dark bread, its crust hard and its interior dense. The traveller tears the bread and uses it to scoop the pottage, eating the two together in the traditional manner. As they eat, let us consider something else that medieval travellers would have been very aware of but that we rarely think about. The food in a medieval inn was not always trustworthy. Unscrupulous innkeepers were known to serve spoiled meat disguised with strong spices, watered-down ale. and bread made with adulterated flour. The medieval period saw numerous laws and regulations attempting to control food quality in commercial establishments, which tells us that problems were common enough to require official intervention. Ale sellers, for instance, were required to display their goods publicly so that customers could judge the quality before buying. Bread bakers were subject to strict regulations about the size and weight of their loaves, with severe penalties for those who cheated customers. Meat sellers were forbidden from processing and selling meat after dark, when customers could not properly inspect their purchases. All of these rules existed because cheating customers was a constant temptation for those selling food and drink. Our traveller, being experienced in the ways of the road, eats their pottage with cautious appreciation. The food is not exceptional, but it is hot and filling, and after a long day of walking, that is enough. The bread is coarse but satisfying, and the pottage, while simple, has the complex, long-simmered flavour that only comes from a pot that has been cooking for days. Now let us turn our attention to what the medieval traveller would drink, for this is a subject of considerable interest and some misunderstanding. The dominant beverage in medieval England was ale. This was not the beer we know today. Medieval ale was made from malted grain, usually barley, and water, but it did not contain hops. Hops, which give modern beer its bitter flavour and also act as a preservative, were not widely used in English brewing until the 15th century. Without hops, medieval ale had a sweeter, fuller flavour and, importantly, a much shorter shelf life. Fresh ale might last only a few days before going sour. This short shelf life explains the ale stake hanging outside our inn. When a new batch of ale was ready, the innkeeper would hang out fresh greenery to advertise it. Travellers learned to look for these signs and to prefer inns with fresh bushes over those with withered ones. Stale ale was not dangerous, necessarily, but it was sour and unpleasant, and no one wanted to pay good money for inferior drink. Medieval ale was also typically weaker than modern beer. The standard small ale that most people drank daily might have an alcohol content of only 2 or 3%, roughly equivalent to modern light beers. This weak ale was considered a food as much as a drink, a source of calories and hydration that was safer than water in many places. Water itself was often unsafe to drink in medieval towns and cities. Human and animal waste contaminated rivers and wells, and waterborne diseases were common and deadly. Ale, by contrast, was made by boiling water as part of the brewing process, which killed many harmful organisms. The alcohol also inhibited bacterial growth. For these reasons, ale was considered a healthier choice than water, and even children routinely drank weak ale rather than water. Stronger ales were also available for those who wanted them, and drinking to excess was a recognized problem in medieval society. The church regularly preached against drunkenness, and secular authorities imposed penalties on those who became drunk and disorderly. Nevertheless, the common room of a medieval inn on any given night would likely contain at least a few people who had consumed more ale than was wise. Our traveller calls for a cup of ale to wash down their bread and pottage. The innkeeper brings a wooden cup, blackened with use and filled with a cloudy, brownish liquid. This cloudiness was normal for medieval ale, which was not filtered as modern beers are. The ale tastes yeasty and slightly sweet, with undertones of the grain from which it was made. It is served at room temperature, as the concept of chilling beverages would have seemed bizarre to medieval people. As the traveller drinks, they might reflect on the other beverages available in the medieval world. Wine was drunk extensively, though it was usually an imported luxury in England. Cider was popular in apple-growing regions. Mead, made from fermented honey, was an ancient drink still consumed in this period, though it was becoming less common as honey became more valuable for other uses. And perry, made from fermented pears, was produced in regions where pear trees flourished, but in most inns, ale was the standard drink, and our traveller would be content with it. The warmth of the fire, the fullness of their belly, and the gentle buzz of weak ale all combine to create a sense of comfort and well-being. The anxieties of the road are fading. The terror of the dark is becoming a memory. Here, in this smoky, crowded room, there is warmth and fellowship and enough to eat and drink. The night is growing later now. Through the small windows, our traveller can see that full darkness has fallen. The wind continues to moan around the eaves of the building, occasionally sending a chill draught through gaps in the walls. But inside, the fire burns steadily, and the conversation continues, and the innkeeper moves from table to table, ensuring that cups are filled and customers are satisfied. This is the rhythm of the medieval inn. This is the boring history for sleep, the ordinary reality of extraordinary times. Food and drink, warmth and shelter, the company of strangers who are, for this one night, something like family. These simple things, these basic human needs, were as important to people 600 years ago as they are to us today. And understanding this truth, feeling the continuity of human experience across the centuries, is perhaps the deepest lesson of this sleep documentary. Let your body relax further. Let your mind drift on the gentle current of history. Soon, we will explore what happened when our traveller finally sought their bed. But for now, let us sit a while longer by the fire, listening to the crackle of flames and the murmur of voices and the howling of the wind outside. Rest now. The night is long, and there is more to discover. When strangers shared a mattress. The hour grows late. The fire has burned down to a bed of glowing coals, still radiating warmth but no longer leaping with flames. Several guests have already found their way to bed, their places by the fire taken by those who arrived later and are still seeking warmth. Our traveller feels the heaviness of exhaustion settling into their limbs. It is time to sleep. But sleeping at a medieval inn was very different from sleeping in a modern hotel. There were no private rooms with individual beds, not for ordinary travellers anyway. There was no comfortable mattress, no clean sheets, no quiet solitude. What there was, in most inns, was a communal sleeping arrangement that modern people would find almost impossible to accept. Let us follow our traveller as they seek their bed and discover what the night has in store. The innkeeper, noticing that our traveller is growing drowsy, gestures toward a narrow stairway at the back of the common room. Up these stairs, they explain, is the sleeping chamber. The traveller gathers their belongings, makes sure their purse is securely tied to their belt and hidden under their clothing, and begins to climb the worn wooden steps. The stairs creak under their weight. They are steep and uneven, built with more regard for saving space than for the comfort of those climbing them. The walls of the stairwell are rough timber, unpainted, and slightly damp to the touch. A single tallow candle, guttering in a wall bracket, provides just enough light to navigate. At the top of the stairs, our traveller emerges into a large, low-ceilinged room. This is the sleeping chamber, and even in the dim light of a single candle, several things are immediately apparent. The room contains one bed. Not one bed per person, mind you, but one bed for the entire room. This bed stretches almost from wall to wall, a great platform of wood covered with straw mattresses. Already, several people are lying on this bed, some asleep and some still awake, their bodies packed together like sardines in a barrel. This arrangement shocks us today, but it was entirely normal in the medieval period. The concept of sleeping alone, in your own bed, in your own room, is a relatively modern invention. For most of human history, sleep was a communal activity. Families slept together in a single bed, parents and children all in a pile. Servants slept in the same room as their masters, ready to attend to any need during the night, and travellers at inns slept together with whatever other travellers happened to be there that night. Privacy, as we understand it, simply did not exist for most medieval people. They were born in the presence of others, they lived their lives surrounded by others, and they died in the presence of others. The idea that you would want to be alone, that solitude was desirable or even bearable, would have seemed strange and perhaps a little sad to most medieval people. Humans were social creatures, meant to live and sleep in groups. Our traveller, therefore, does not find this communal bed unusual. They simply look for an open space where they can lie down. Near the edge of the bed, there is a gap, and they make their way toward it, stepping carefully over the bodies of those already sleeping. The mattresses are made of straw. Straw mattresses were the standard bedding for common people throughout the medieval period, and they deserve some explanation. A straw mattress was simply a large cloth bag, usually made of rough linen or canvas, stuffed with dried straw. These mattresses were relatively cheap and easy to make, and the straw could be replaced when it became too compressed or dirty. A fresh straw mattress was actually quite comfortable. The straw provided cushioning and insulation, lifting the sleeper off the cold floor and trapping body heat. Fresh straw also smelled pleasant, like a summer meadow or a newly harvested field. Many people today find the smell of hay or straw nostalgic and comforting, and the same was undoubtedly true for medieval people. However, a straw mattress that had been in use for some time was a different matter. The straw became compressed and lumpy, offering less cushioning. It absorbed sweat and other bodily fluids, developing odours that were less than pleasant, and it became home to various small creatures. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs all thrived in straw mattresses, and most medieval people accepted some level of vermin as an inevitable part of sleeping. The mattresses in this inn have clearly been in use for some time. As our traveller settles onto the bed, they can feel the lumps and thin spots where the straw has compressed. The cloth cover is stained and slightly damp in places, and there is a certain smell, a combination of old straw, human sweat, and something else, something indefinably organic and alive. Over the straw mattress, there might be a blanket or two, rough woolen cloths meant to be shared among all the sleepers. In better establishments, there might be linen sheets between the sleeper and the mattress, but in a typical roadside inn, such luxuries were rare. Our traveller will sleep on the bare mattress, wrapped in their own cloak for warmth. The pillow situation is similar. There are a few bolsters, long cylindrical pillows stuffed with straw or perhaps with wool or feathers. These are meant to be shared, and several heads might rest on a single bolster. Travellers who wanted a pillow to themselves could stuff their bag or bundle with soft items and use that instead. Our traveller finds their spot, lies down, and attempts to get comfortable. On one side of them lies a large merchant, already snoring heavily, his belly rising and falling with each breath. On the other side lies a younger traveller, awake and watchful, their eyes glinting in the dim candlelight. At the foot of the bed, a family group has arranged themselves, parents and 2 children all huddled together for warmth. This is the reality of communal sleeping. You slept touching strangers. You felt their body heat. You heard their breathing, their snoring, their occasional muttering or crying out in dreams. You smelled them. There was no pretending that you were alone, no illusion of privacy. You were simply one body among many, sharing warmth and space through the long night. The experience was not always pleasant. Snoring was a universal complaint, and medieval literature contains numerous references to the misery of trying to sleep beside a particularly loud snorer. Body odour was another issue. After days or weeks on the road, travellers did not smell fresh, and the combined odour of many unwashed bodies in a small space could be overwhelming. Worse still was the risk of theft or assault. Sleeping beside strangers meant being vulnerable beside strangers. A skilled thief could cut your purse strings while you slept, relieving you of your coins without waking you. A violent person could do worse. For this reason, experienced travellers slept with their valuables secured close to their bodies, and they trained themselves to sleep lightly, alert to any suspicious movement. The innkeeper did what they could to minimize these risks. They were responsible for the safety of their guests, and if a traveller was robbed at the innkeeper might be held liable. For this reason, inns often had rules about who could sleep where. Women and families might be given a separate section of the sleeping chamber, or even a separate room entirely. Servants might be expected to sleep in the stables with the horses rather than in the main sleeping chamber. People who seemed suspicious or dangerous might be refused lodging altogether. Some inns employed night watchmen who would patrol the sleeping areas, ensuring that nothing untoward occurred. Others locked the sleeping chamber door after a certain hour, preventing anyone from entering or leaving until morning. These measures were not always effective, but they represented an acknowledgement that communal sleeping carried risks that needed to be managed. Our traveller, lying awake in the darkness, is very aware of these risks. They have positioned themselves so that they can feel their purse against their body. They have placed their bag beneath their head so that no one can take it without waking them, and they are trying to stay at least partially alert, even as exhaustion pulls them towards sleep. The darkness of the sleeping chamber is profound. The single candle that lit their way has been extinguished, and now there is only the faint glow of moonlight filtering through the small windows. Medieval people experienced true darkness in a way that we rarely do today. Without electric light, without the ambient glow of cities and screens, night was genuinely dark, a thick and enveloping blackness that hid everything beyond arm's reach. In this darkness, sounds become more important. Our traveller lies still, listening. They can hear the breathing of the people around them, some slow and deep in sleep, others still restless. They can hear the snoring of the large merchant, a rhythmic rumble that rises and falls like ocean waves. They can hear the occasional creak of the bed frame as someone shifts position. They can hear, faintly, the sounds from the common room below, where a few late drinkers are still talking by the fire. They can hear the wind outside, moaning around the building, finding every crack and gap to whistle through. And beneath all these sounds, there is the deeper silence of the medieval night. No engines, no electronics, no constant hum of modern life, just the sounds of wind and wood and human bodies. Just the ancient sounds that our ancestors heard for thousands of years before the modern world drowned them out. This silence, this darkness, this intimacy with strangers, this was the reality of sleeping in the medieval world. It was not comfortable by our standards. It was not private. It was not particularly clean or safe, but it was human. It was the way people had slept for millennia, in groups, sharing warmth and protection against the dangers of the night. There is something almost primal about this kind of sleeping. Humans evolved as social animals, living and sleeping in groups. Our ancestors on the African savanna would have slept huddled together, protecting each other from predators, sharing body heat against the cold of night. In some ways, the communal sleeping arrangements of the medieval inn were a continuation of this ancient pattern, a remnant of our deep past, surviving into an era of growing civilization. Modern people, sleeping alone in private bedrooms, have gained many things: privacy, comfort, freedom from snoring neighbours and suspicious strangers. But we have also lost something. We have lost the immediate physical presence of other humans through the vulnerable hours of the night. We have lost the comfort of knowing that others are right there, breathing beside us, sharing the darkness. We have lost the experience of waking in the night and feeling the warmth of another body, the reassurance that we are not alone. I am not suggesting that we should return to communal sleeping. Modern sensibilities about privacy and personal space are valuable, and they reflect real improvements in quality of life. But it is worth understanding what our ancestors experienced, and perhaps worth feeling a moment of connection with them across the centuries. Our traveller, finally succumbing to exhaustion, feels their eyes growing heavy. The snoring of the merchant beside them has become a kind of white noise, oddly soothing. The warmth of the bodies around them is comfortable, like being wrapped in a living blanket. The hard lumps of the straw mattress seem less noticeable as sleep approaches. The last thing they are aware of, before sleep takes them, is the sound of rain beginning to fall on the roof above. It is a gentle sound at first, a soft pattering, then growing stronger as the rain intensifies. In the darkness, our traveller smiles slightly. They are glad to be inside tonight. They are glad to be warm and dry, even if the bed is shared with strangers and the mattress smells of old straw. They are safe. They have shelter. Tomorrow, the road will call them again, but tonight they can rest. And so sleep comes, as it always does, washing away the cares and worries of the day. In the darkness of the sleeping chamber, a dozen strangers breathe together, sharing the night, sharing the simple human experience of sleep. This is the gentle rhythm of the past. This is the quiet reality of medieval daily life. Not grand battles or royal courts, but ordinary people seeking ordinary comforts. A warm fire, a full belly, a place to lay their head. These are the things that mattered most, then as now. Let your own breathing slow. Let your own body relax into the mattress beneath you. Let the rhythm of this story carry you towards sleep, just as our medieval traveller has found their rest. The rain continues to fall. The wind continues to blow. The night deepens over the medieval inn. And somewhere in the darkness, strangers sleep side by side, as humans have always done, as humans will always do, connected by the simple, shared need for rest. The rules of the house. The first light of dawn creeps through the small windows of the sleeping chamber. It is a grey light, filtered through the persistent rain that has fallen all night, but it is enough to signal that the long darkness has ended. One by one, the sleepers in the communal bed begin to stir. Our traveller wakes slowly, rising through layers of sleep like a diver ascending from deep water. For a moment, they are disoriented. Where are they? Why is there a weight against their side, a warmth pressed against them? Then memory returns. They are at the inn. They are safe. The night has passed. The morning routine at a medieval inn was very different from what we might expect today. There was no leisurely lying in bed, no room service breakfast delivered on a tray. The medieval inn operated on a strict schedule, and guests were expected to conform to it. The first thing our traveller notices is that some of their fellow sleepers are already up and moving about. The family group at the foot of the bed is gathering their belongings. One of the merchants is pulling on his boots. The large man who snored so prodigiously through the night is still asleep, but others are beginning to poke him awake. The inn does not allow guests to sleep past a certain hour, and those who try to do so are unceremoniously roused. This was one of the many rules that governed life at a medieval inn. These rules varied from place to place, but certain common themes emerged. The rules served several purposes. They kept the peace among diverse guests. They protected the innkeeper's property. They ensured that the inn could operate efficiently. And they maintained a basic level of moral order that satisfied both the church and the secular authorities. Let us examine some of these rules in detail, for they reveal much about the concerns and values of medieval society. The first and most fundamental rule was that violence was forbidden. This might seem obvious, but it was far from trivial in the medieval period. People commonly carried weapons, tempers were quick, alcohol flowed freely, and the close quarters of the inn created endless opportunities for friction. A wrong word, a perceived insult, a disputed debt, any of these could lead to bloodshed if left unchecked. Innkeepers dealt with this threat in several ways. Many inns required guests to surrender their weapons upon arrival. Swords, knives, and daggers would be collected and stored safely until the guest departed. This was not always strictly enforced, as travellers were understandably reluctant to part with their means of self-defence, but it was at least encouraged. When weapons could not be collected, the innkeeper would make clear that any violence would result in immediate expulsion and a report to local authorities. The penalties for violence could be severe. Assault might result in fines, imprisonment, or physical punishment. Murder, of course, was a capital crime, and even a simple brawl could lead to a guest being banned from the inn permanently, which was a serious inconvenience for anyone who regularly travelled that route. The innkeeper also worked to diffuse tensions before they escalated. An experienced innkeeper could read the mood of their common room, could sense when an argument was becoming dangerous, could intervene with a joke or a round of drinks or a firm word before matters got out of hand. This skill was essential to the profession, and innkeepers who lacked it often found themselves presiding over regular outbreaks of violence that drove away respectable customers. A second important rule concerned the treatment of the inn's property. Guests were expected to pay for any damage they caused, whether intentional or accidental. Breaking a cup, damaging furniture, tearing bedding, any of these offences would result in charges being added to the guest's bill. Theft from the inn was treated even more seriously. Taking a cup, a spoon, or any other item without permission could result in arrest and prosecution. This rule extended to the innkeeper's servants and family. Guests were forbidden from harassing, assaulting, or propositioning the women of the household. This rule was often difficult to enforce, as some guests saw servants as fair game for their attentions. But respectable innkeepers made clear that such behaviour would not be tolerated, and those who violated this rule could expect to be thrown out regardless of how much they had paid. A third set of rules concerned payment and honesty. Guests were expected to pay for their lodging and meals before receiving them, or at least before departure. Leaving without paying, known as bilking, was a serious offence that could result in pursuit, arrest, and punishment. Innkeepers kept careful records of what each guest owed, and they were vigilant about collecting every penny. Cheating the inn in other ways was also forbidden. Guests could not bring their own food or drink to consume on the premises, as this deprived the innkeeper of revenue. They could not steal food from the kitchen or ale from the barrels. They could not claim to have lost items they had never possessed in order to extract compensation from the innkeeper. A fourth category of rules concerned behaviour during sleeping hours. Guests were expected to go to bed at a reasonable hour and to rise when required. Making excessive noise during sleeping hours was forbidden, as was bringing flames near the straw mattresses. Fire was a constant danger in medieval buildings, and an inn fire could destroy not just the inn but neighbouring buildings as well. The penalty for carelessly causing a fire could be severe, including liability for all the damage caused. Sexual activity in the common sleeping area was forbidden, though this rule was probably violated with some regularity. The close quarters of the communal bed made illicit encounters possible, and the darkness provided some cover. But if discovered, such behaviour brought shame and punishment. Prostitution at inns was officially forbidden but unofficially common, with some establishments gaining reputations as places where such services could be easily obtained. A fifth set of rules concerned religious observance. Medieval society was Christian society, and the rhythms of religious life affected every aspect of daily existence. Inns were expected to observe feast days and fast days. On fish days, no meat could be served. On major holy days, the inn might be required to close, or at least to suspend the sale of alcohol. Guests were expected to behave with appropriate decorum on these occasions. Some inns provided space for religious observance. A corner of the common room might be set aside with a small shrine or religious image. Morning and evening prayers might be offered, either by a travelling priest who happened to be among the guests or by the innkeeper themselves. Failure to participate in these observances was not always punished, but it was noticed and could lead to suspicion about a guest's character. A sixth category of rules concerned the reporting of suspicious persons and activities. Medieval authorities took a keen interest in who was travelling through their territories and why. Innkeepers were often required to keep records of their guests, noting names, origins, destinations, and purposes of travel. They were expected to report anyone who seemed suspicious, whether that meant foreigners, solitary travellers, those who avoided questions about their identity, or those who seemed to be fleeing from something. This reporting requirement made innkeepers into unofficial agents of the state. A traveller who wished to move about without attracting official attention needed to be careful about where they stayed and how they presented themselves. The anonymity that modern travellers take for granted was much harder to achieve in the medieval period, especially for anyone who did not blend into the local population. These rules were enforced through various means. The innkeeper's authority was primary. A guest who broke the rules could be expelled, denied service, or reported to authorities. The other guests also served as enforcers, as they had an interest in maintaining peace and order. A violent or disruptive guest threatened everyone's comfort and safety, and the other guests might take matters into their own hands if the innkeeper failed to act. Local authorities provided backup. Many towns employed night watchmen who would patrol the streets and check on establishments like inns. These watchmen had the authority to intervene in disturbances and to arrest troublemakers. In serious cases, guests might be held at the inn until authorities arrived to deal with them. Our traveller, having slept peacefully through the night without violating any rules, has nothing to fear this morning. They gather their belongings, check that their purse is still secure, and prepare to descend to the common room. The morning meal will be simpler than last night's supper, perhaps just bread and ale, but it will provide energy for another day on the road. Before leaving the sleeping chamber, our traveller pauses to take one last look at the communal bed. The large snorer has finally been roused and is grumbling as he searches for his boots. The watchful young person from last night is already gone. Slipped away in the early dawn, the family is ushering their children down the stairs. The straw mattresses are rumpled and compressed, marked by the bodies that spent the night upon them. Tonight, other travellers will sleep here. The mattresses will receive new bodies. The blankets will be shared by different strangers, and the whole cycle will begin again. The medieval inn was a place of constant flow, constant change, people arriving and departing in an endless stream. Only the innkeeper and their family remained constant, anchored in this place while the world passed through. This is one of the fascinating aspects of medieval inn history. The inn was a node in a network, a point where many paths crossed. News travelled through inns as travellers shared what they had seen and heard. Goods travelled through inns as merchants displayed their wares and made deals. Ideas travelled through inns as scholars, pilgrims, and officials discussed their views. The inn was a centre of exchange, a marketplace of information as well as goods and services. Our traveller makes their way downstairs, ready to face whatever this new day might bring. But before they leave the inn entirely, let us spend a little more time exploring this remarkable institution. Let us examine the economics of running a medieval inn, the people who worked there, and the place of the inn in the broader society of the medieval world. The common room is quieter this morning than it was last night. The fire has been built up again, fresh logs crackling as they catch. The innkeeper is already at work, directing servants and preparing for the day ahead. A few early risers are seated by the fire, eating their simple breakfast and discussing their plans. Our traveller finds a seat and waits for their morning meal. They have time. The rain has stopped, but the roads will be muddy, and there is no point in leaving before the light is strong enough to travel safely. They settle in to watch and listen, to observe the life of this medieval inn in its morning routines. The breakfast that arrives is indeed simple. A chunk of bread, darker and denser than yesterday's, perhaps slightly stale. A cup of small ale, weak and watery but refreshing. This is the standard morning fare for common travellers. Those with more money might request eggs, cheese, or cold meat, but our traveller is content with the basics. As they eat, they watch the innkeeper at work. Running a medieval inn, was a complex business requiring skills in hospitality, accounting, cooking, brewing, maintenance, and social management. Let us examine this business more closely. The economic foundation of the inn was the sale of ale. Brewing was often done on the premises, in a separate building or in a corner of the kitchen. The innkeeper, or more often the innkeeper's wife, would brew batches of ale regularly, timing the brewing to ensure a continuous supply of fresh product. The ale stake outside would be refreshed when a new batch was ready, drawing in travellers who knew to look for fresh greenery. Food sales provided additional revenue. The pottage that simmered constantly over the fire was cheap to produce, made from vegetables that could be grown in the inn's own garden or purchased cheaply from local farmers. Meat was more expensive to source but could be sold at a substantial markup. Bread might be baked on site or purchased from a local baker. Every morsel of food sold represented profit for the inn. Lodging fees added another revenue stream. Charging for a place in the communal bed was essentially pure profit, as the marginal cost of adding one more body to the pile was nearly zero. Better inns might offer private chambers at higher prices, catering to wealthy travellers who valued comfort and privacy. Stabling fees for horses added still more to the inn's income. But running an inn also involved significant costs. The building itself required constant maintenance. The thatched roof needed regular repair to keep out water. The timber frame needed to be checked for rot and insect damage. The fireplace required cleaning to prevent chimney fires. All of these tasks consumed time and money. Supplies had to be purchased. Grain for brewing, ingredients for cooking, candles for lighting, straw for bedding, wood for fuel. All of these things had to be obtained somehow. Inns in towns might purchase supplies from local markets. Rural inns might grow much of what they needed, maintaining gardens, orching chickens, and raising pigs to supply their kitchens. Labour was another major cost. A successful inn required many hands. There were servants to clean, cook, serve, and tend the fire. There were stable hands to care for guests' horses. There might be a brewer dedicated to making ale, a cook responsible for food, and various general helpers to do whatever needed doing. These workers needed to be paid, fed, and housed, all of which ate into the inn's profits. And then there were the costs imposed by authorities. Inns were required to obtain licenses to operate. They paid taxes on their ale sales. They were subject to inspections by official ale tasters who checked the quality and price of their products. They might be required to provide free lodging to certain official travellers, absorbing the cost themselves. All of these obligations reduced the profitability of the business. For all these reasons, running a successful inn was no easy matter. Many people tried and failed. Those who succeeded usually had a combination of good location, adequate capital, business sense, and the personal qualities needed to manage a diverse clientele. The innkeeper who could keep guests happy, maintain order, produce decent food and drink, and turn a profit was practicing a genuine craft. Our traveller finishes their breakfast and prepares to depart. They pay their reckoning, the sum of what they owe for food, drink, and lodging. The innkeeper records the payment and wishes them safe travels. It is a brief, business-like exchange, but beneath it lies a deeper connection. For one night, this traveller was a member of this household, protected by the innkeeper's hospitality. Now they must venture out again, back to the uncertain world of the road. As they gather their belongings and head for the door, our traveller takes one last look around the common room. This place, this smoky, crowded, fascinating place, has sheltered them through the night. It has fed them, warmed them, given them rest. In a few minutes, it will be behind them, becoming a memory that fades with each step down the road. But for now, in this moment of transition, they feel a fleeting gratitude for the medieval inn and all it represents. In a world of danger and uncertainty, it offered safety. In a world of cold and hardship, it offered warmth. In a world of loneliness, it offered company. These are not small gifts. These are the fundamental things that make human life bearable. The door opens. The morning air rushes in, cool and damp with recent rain. Our traveller steps out into the grey light, ready to continue their journey. Behind them, the inn remains, waiting for the next weary soul who will need its shelter. The ale stake sways gently in the morning breeze. The smoke rises from the chimney, and somewhere inside, the innkeeper is already preparing for tonight, when new travellers will arrive seeking the same ancient comforts. Horses in the courtyard and servants in the shadows. Our traveller has departed, but let us remain at the inn a while longer. Let us step outside into the muddy courtyard and explore another essential aspect of medieval inn life. Let us talk about the horses. Medieval travel depended on animals in ways that are difficult for us to fully appreciate today. For those who could afford them, horses were the primary means of long-distance transportation. For merchants moving goods, carts and wagons pulled by horses or oxen were essential. Even travellers who walked often used pack animals to carry their belongings. The care and housing of these animals was a major concern for any medieval inn. The courtyard of our inn is enclosed by wooden fences with a large gate that can be closed and barred at night. Within this enclosure stand several structures. There is a stable, a long, low building with space for 12 horses or more. There is a shed for storing hay and oats. There is a water trough, fed by a pipe from a nearby well. And there is an open area where horses can be walked, groomed, and examined. This morning, the courtyard is muddy from last night's rain, and several horses stand in the stable, looking out with mild interest at the humans moving about. These are the horses of last night's guests, creatures who have also spent the night in relative comfort after days on the road. Caring for horses at a medieval inn was a specialized task. The stable hands who did this work needed to know about horses. They needed to be able to recognize signs of illness or injury. They needed to know how to feed and water horses properly. They needed to be able to handle even difficult or frightened animals safely. This was not unskilled labor. It was a craft with its own body of knowledge and techniques. When a mounted traveller arrived at an inn, one of the first things that happened was the transfer of their horse to the stable hands. The traveller would dismount in the courtyard, hand over the reins, and give any special instructions about the horse's care. A horse that had developed a problem during the day's travel, perhaps a loose shoe or a tender leg, would be pointed out so that it could receive attention. The stable hands would then lead the horse into the stable and begin the evening routine. The horse would be unsaddled and unbridled, its equipment hung carefully on hooks or laid across rails. The horse would be rubbed down with cloths or bundles of straw, removing the sweat and dirt that had accumulated during the day. Its hooves would be checked for stones or other objects that might cause lameness. Its legs would be examined for cuts, swelling, or heat that might indicate injury. Then the horse would be fed and watered. The standard feed for horses in this era was hay and oats, supplemented with whatever other grains or plants were available locally. A tired horse needed substantial calories to recover from a day's work, and the quality of the feed could make a real difference in how well the horse travelled the following day. Smart travellers learned which inns had the best stabling and were willing to pay a premium for superior care of their animals. The overnight accommodation for horses in a medieval stable was not luxurious, but it was adequate. Each horse would have its own stall, or at least a defined space in a larger area. The floor would be covered with straw for bedding, similar in many ways to the straw mattresses used by human guests. A manger at the front of the stall would hold hay, and water would be available from buckets or troughs. The stable at night was a place of quiet activity. The horses would eat and drink, then settle into rest. Unlike humans, horses can sleep standing up, though they also lie down for deeper rest periods. Through the night, the stable would be filled with the sounds of horses shifting, chewing, and occasionally whinnying or stamping. A stable hand might sleep in or near the stable, ready to respond if any problem arose. The morning routine was the reverse of the evening one. The horses would be fed again, watered, and groomed. Their equipment would be inspected and any necessary repairs made. When the owner was ready to depart, the horse would be saddled and bridled and led out to the courtyard, ready for another day on the road. All of this service cost money, of course. Stabling fees were a significant part of a mounted traveller's expenses, often equal to or greater than the cost of the traveller's own lodging. A horse that ate oats rather than just hay would cost more. A horse that needed special care would cost more still. These fees could add up quickly, which is one reason why many travellers walked rather than rode, despite the slower pace. The relationship between the inn and its horses was symbiotic in interesting ways. The presence of good stabling attracted mounted travellers, who tended to be wealthier and more profitable customers than those who walked. The income from stabling helped support the inn's other operations, and the horses themselves contributed to the life of the establishment, providing manure for gardens, warmth for the stable area, and a sense of activity and importance. Let us now turn our attention to another often overlooked aspect of medieval inn life. Let us talk about the servants who made everything work. A successful medieval inn employed numerous servants, each with their own duties and responsibilities. These workers operated largely in the shadows, invisible to guests who were focused on their own comfort and concerns. But without their labour, the inn could not have functioned. The lowest-ranking servants were the general labourers who did whatever needed to be done. They swept the floors, emptied the chamber pots, hauled water from the well, chopped wood for the fire, and performed countless other tasks that kept the establishment running. These workers were often young, sometimes children, and they were paid little beyond their room and board. Their lives were hard, consisting of endless labour with few rewards. Above them were the specialised workers, the cook or cooks who prepared food, the brewer or brewster who made the ale, the stable hands who cared for horses. These workers had specific skills that made them more valuable and harder to replace. They might be paid actual wages on top of their room and board. They might have somewhat better working conditions and more respect from the innkeeper. At the top of the servant hierarchy were those who interacted directly with guests, the tapster or potboy who served drinks, the serving maid who brought food to tables, the chambermaid who tended the sleeping quarters. These workers needed social skills as well as physical labour. They needed to be pleasant, efficient, and able to handle difficult customers. A good serving maid could make guests feel welcome and encourage them to spend more money. A bad one could drive customers away. All of these servants lived at the inn, usually sleeping in corners, attics, or outbuildings not used by paying guests. Their lives were intertwined with the life of the establishment. They saw everything, heard everything, knew the secrets of every guest who passed through. In their own way, they were the true experts on medieval inn history, though their perspectives were rarely recorded. The servants' lives were governed by the same rules that applied to guests, and often more strictly. They were expected to be honest, hard-working, and morally upright. Theft by servants was punished severely, as the innkeeper trusted them with access to money, food, and guests' belongings. Sexual impropriety could result in dismissal or worse. Laziness, incompetence, or insolence could also lead to termination. At the same time, servants were vulnerable to abuse by both the innkeeper and the guests. Long hours, hard work, low pay, and harsh discipline were common. Female servants in particular faced risks of harassment and assault. Medieval law offered some protections to servants, but enforcement was often weak, and servants had little power to advocate for themselves. Despite these hardships, Working at an inn could be an attractive option for young people from poor families. It provided food, shelter, and a small income. It offered the opportunity to learn a trade and make connections. It allowed young people to see a wider world than they would have known in their home village. For some, it was a stepping stone to better things, perhaps eventually opening their own inn or marrying into a more prosperous family. Let us observe one of these servants as they go about their morning tasks. Here is a young woman, perhaps 16 or 17, carrying a bucket of water from the well to the kitchen. Her name, let us say, is Agnes. She has worked at this inn for 3 years, since she was old enough to be useful. Her family lives in a village a few miles away, and she visits them when she can, but mostly her life is here, in this sprawling, busy, demanding establishment. Agnes's morning began before dawn, when she was roused from her straw pallet in the attic by the cook calling for help. Since then, she has been in constant motion. She helped prepare the morning bread. She carried food and drink to early rising guests. She swept the common room floor, disturbing the old rushes and sending up clouds of dust that made her cough. She emptied the chamber pots from the sleeping chamber into the pit behind the stable. And now she is hauling water, one heavy bucket at a time, because the kitchen needs it for cooking and washing. Her hands are rough and chapped from constant work in water and lye. Her dress is simple and worn, patched in several places. Her hair is tucked under a linen cap to keep it out of her way. She is not pretty in any conventional sense, but there is a vitality about her, an energy that comes from youth and good health, and the habit of constant activity. If we could ask Agnes about her life, what would she say? She might tell us that she is tired, always tired, and that she dreams sometimes of a life without endless labour. She might tell us about the small pleasures that make her days bearable. A bit of extra food smuggled from the kitchen, a kind word from a guest who appreciated her service, a few moments of rest by the fire when the innkeeper's back is turned, the fellowship of the other servants who share her hardships and understand her complaints. She might also tell us about her hopes for the future. Perhaps she will catch the eye of a respectable traveller who will marry her and take her away from this life. Perhaps she will save enough money to set herself up in a small business. Perhaps she will simply endure, year after year, until she is too old to work and must rely on charity or family to survive. These were the limited options available to young women in her position, and Agnes would be realistic about her prospects. But she might also speak with some pride about her work. She is good at what she does. She knows how the inn operates, knows its rhythms and requirements. She can anticipate what the cook needs before being asked. She can calm an angry guest with a smile and a soft word. She can tell at a glance which travellers might cause trouble and which will be easy customers. These are real skills, learned through experience, and they give her a sense of competence and value. Agnes represents the invisible foundation of medieval inn history. Without servants like her, the inn could not function. The fires would not be lit, the food would not be cooked, the beds would not be made, the horses would not be cared for. The comfort that travellers experienced, the warmth and safety and full bellies, all of this rested on the labour of people like Agnes, whose names were rarely recorded and whose stories were rarely told. As we continue our exploration of the medieval inn, let us carry Agnes with us as a reminder of these forgotten workers. The cosy fire in the common room, the hot pottage in the bowl, the straw-filled mattress in the sleeping chamber, none of these things appeared by magic. They were the product of human labour, hard and constant, and often unappreciated. This is part of the reality of the past that we must understand if we want to see medieval life clearly. The morning advances. The guests have departed, one by one, heading off to their various destinations. The courtyard empties of horses. The common room grows quiet. The inn enters a period of relative calm before the next wave of travellers begins to arrive in the afternoon. For Agnes and her fellow servants, this is a time of intensive cleaning and preparation. The sleeping chamber must be tidied, the rushes raked and perhaps partially replaced. The common room must be swept, the tables wiped, the benches straightened. The privy must be cleaned, a task that falls to the lowest-ranking servants and is universally dreaded. The kitchen must be restocked, the fire fed, the pottage stirred and supplemented with fresh ingredients. This cycle of cleaning and preparation happened every day, endlessly repeated. The inn was never truly at rest. There was always work to be done, always another task waiting. The servants moved through this work with practiced efficiency, doing what needed to be done without excessive thought or complaint. This was simply their life, the daily reality of service in a medieval establishment. As we watch Agnes and her colleagues work, let us reflect on the nature of this labour. It was not glamorous or exciting. It was not the stuff of legends or ballads, but it was essential. It was the foundation upon which the inn rested, the hidden infrastructure of medieval travel, and in its own way, it was worthy of respect and remembrance. The history we usually learn is the history of kings and battles, of great events and famous people. But there is another history, a quieter history, the history of ordinary people doing ordinary things. Agnes's story is part of this history, the story of countless servants, labourers, and common folk whose lives made possible the more dramatic events we remember. This is the boring history for sleep, perhaps, but it is also the true history of how most people actually lived. Let your mind dwell for a moment on Agnes and her world. Let yourself feel the weight of the bucket she carries, the roughness of her chapped hands, the weariness in her legs after hours of standing and walking. Let yourself appreciate the small pleasures that brighten her days and the large hopes that sustain her spirit. She is a real person, or at least a composite of real people, who lived and worked and dreamed in a world very different from our own. And then let yourself drift back towards sleep, carried by the gentle rhythm of this story. The inn is quiet now, preparing for the travellers who will arrive this evening. The fire burns low in the common room, waiting to be built up again. Agnes carries her bucket to the kitchen and sets it down, flexing her tired arms. The morning light strengthens outside the windows, promising a fine day for travel. All is well at the medieval inn. All is as it should be, and somewhere out on the road, our traveller is making their way toward the next destination, their night at the inn becoming a memory that will fade into the countless other memories of their journey. The sounds and silences of the medieval night. Let us return to the evening hours, to the time when the inn comes most fully alive. Let us close our eyes and listen to the sounds of the medieval night. The first sound that reaches our ears is the fire. It crackles and pops as the flames lick at fresh logs. Occasionally, a log shifts, sending up a shower of sparks that rises toward the blackened ceiling. The fire is the heartbeat of the inn, the sound that underlies all other sounds, constant and reassuring. Against this background of fire sound, we hear the voices of the guests. There is the low murmur of conversation, words blending together into an indistinct hum. Occasionally, a voice rises above the rest, telling a joke or making a point with emphasis. There is laughter, sometimes a single person, sometimes a group responding to something amusing. There are occasional heated exchanges, voices rising in argument before subsiding again. The common room is a symphony of human sound, complex and ever-changing. We hear the sounds of eating and drinking, the clink of cups being set on tables, the tear of bread being pulled apart, the slurp of pottage being drunk from bowls, the smack of lips and the belch of satisfaction. These are animal sounds, basic and unrefined, but they are also sounds of contentment, of bodies being nourished after a hard day. We hear the sounds of the servants at work, footsteps crossing the rushes, creating a soft rustling sound, the thump of fresh logs being added to the fire, the splash of ale being poured into cups, the clatter of bowls being cleared and stacked, a servant calling out to another, their words quick and businesslike. These sounds form a counterpoint to the guests' leisurely noise, a reminder that work continues even while others rest. From outside, we hear the sounds of the night. The wind in the trees, sometimes rising to a moan as it finds gaps in the building's walls. The distant bark of a dog, the stamping and shuffling of horses in the stable, the occasional cry of an owl or the rustle of some small creature in the thatch above. These are the sounds of the world beyond the inn's walls, the world of darkness and cold that the guests have temporarily escaped. And beneath all these sounds there is a kind of silence, not absence of sound, for the inn is never truly quiet, but a deeper silence, a stillness that underlies the noise. This is the silence of the medieval night itself, the profound quiet of a world without motors, without electronics, without the constant hum of modern life. It is a silence that most of us never experience today, a silence so deep that the smallest sounds seem loud by comparison. Let us sink into this soundscape. Let it wash over us like water. The crackle of fire, the murmur of voices, the clink of cups, the moan of wind, the deep silence beneath. As the evening deepens, the character of the sounds changes. The conversations grow quieter, more intimate. People are tired, and the ale is taking effect, and the warmth of the fire is making everyone drowsy. The laughter becomes less frequent, the arguments fewer. A kind of peace settles over the common room. One by one, the guests make their way toward bed. We hear the creak of the stairs as they climb. We hear the rustle of movement in the sleeping chamber above. We hear the occasional murmur of voices as late arrivals find their places in the communal bed. Then these sounds too diminish, replaced by the sounds of sleep, breathing, slow and regular. Snoring, from one or several sources. The occasional movement as a sleeper shifts position. The inn is entering its quietest hours. The fire has been banked, covered with ash to preserve the coals until morning. Only a faint glow remains, casting dim red light across the empty common room. The servants have finished their tasks and retired to their own resting places. The innkeeper has checked the doors, made sure the fire is safe, counted the day's earnings, and gone to bed. The inn is asleep. But even in sleep, the inn is not silent. The building itself makes sounds. The timber frame creaks and settles as temperatures change. The thatch rustles as small animals move through it. The shutters rattle in the wind. These are the sounds of an old building, sounds that have accumulated over decades of existence, as familiar to the regular inhabitants as their own breathing. And there are human sounds. The snoring from the sleeping chamber continues, sometimes loud enough to be heard throughout the building. Someone coughs. Someone mumbles in their sleep, words without meaning, fragments of dreams. Someone rises to use the chamber pot, their footsteps soft in the darkness. These are the sounds of human bodies at rest, vulnerable and unconscious, passing through the long hours of the night. Outside, the night continues its own rhythms. The wind rises and falls, sometimes silent, sometimes gusting. An animal calls in the distance, perhaps a fox or a night bird. Rain might begin to fall, pattering on the thatch, creating a soothing white noise that helps the sleepers rest. The stars wheel slowly overhead, invisible from inside but present nonetheless, marking the passage of time toward dawn. This is the soundscape of the medieval night. It is simple and complex at once. It lacks the constant hum of our modern world, the electrical buzz that underlies everything we hear today. But it is not silent. It is full of its own sounds, natural sounds, human sounds, sounds that our ancestors heard for countless generations before us. Listening to these sounds, we might feel a strange sense of connection across time. The crackle of fire sounds the same today as it did 700 years ago. The moan of wind is unchanged. The breathing of sleeping humans is eternal. These sounds link us to our ancestors in a direct, immediate way. They remind us that beneath all the differences between our world and theirs, there are profound continuities. Let us rest in these sounds for a moment. Let them become our own lullaby, our own pathway to sleep. The crackle of fire growing softer as the coals fade, the slow breathing of sleepers nearby, the distant wind carrying sounds from far away, the deep silence beneath everything, the silence of the medieval night, the silence of the past. This is the reality of sleeping in a medieval inn. Not just the physical conditions, the straw mattresses and shared beds and smoky air, but also this soundscape, this acoustic environment so different from our own. Our ancestors fell asleep to these sounds, just as we might fall asleep to them now, carried by their gentle rhythm into the land of dreams. The night deepens. The hours pass. The sounds continue, soft and repetitive, unchanging yet ever-changing. Fire, wind, breath, silence. The medieval night holds the inn in its embrace, and the inn holds its sleepers, and sleep holds them all in its timeless peace. Rest now. Let the sounds of the past carry you forward into your own rest. The fire crackles softly, the wind sighs, the night is deep and still. All is well, pilgrims, merchants, and wanderers. Let us now consider the remarkable variety of people who passed through the medieval inn. The inn was a crossroads, a place where different worlds intersected, where people from many walks of life shared space for a brief time before continuing on their separate ways. The pilgrim was perhaps the most respected type of traveller in medieval society. Pilgrimage was a religious act, a journey undertaken for spiritual purposes, to visit a holy site, to venerate relics, to seek healing or forgiveness or blessing. Pilgrims were protected by both church and secular law, and harming a pilgrim was considered a particularly serious offence. The great pilgrimage routes of medieval Europe were well-established highways of faith. In England, the shrine of Thomas Becket at Canterbury drew thousands of pilgrims each year. In Spain, the Cathedral of Santiago de Compostela was the goal of pilgrims from across the continent. In the Holy Land, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem was the ultimate destination for the most devout and adventurous. Pilgrims travelled in groups for safety and companionship. They wore distinctive clothing that identified their purpose, simple robes, broad-brimmed hats, and staffs to support them on the long roads. They collected badges from each shrine they visited, small metal tokens that proved they had completed their journey. These badges were worn proudly on their hats and cloaks, visual evidence of their piety and perseverance. When pilgrims arrived at an inn, they were typically shown special consideration. Many inns offered reduced rates or even free lodging to genuine pilgrims. The church encouraged this charity, promising spiritual rewards to those who assisted pilgrims on their journeys. Pilgrims might also receive the best places by the fire, the freshest bread, the fullest cups. Hospitality to pilgrims was a religious duty, a way of participating in their sacred journey. But not everyone who claimed to be a pilgrim was genuine. The roads were also travelled by false pilgrims, criminals, and vagabonds who adopted pilgrim dress to avoid suspicion and claim charity they did not deserve. Innkeepers learned to be cautious, to ask questions that would reveal whether a pilgrim was real or fake. Where did they come from? Which shrines had they visited? What prayers were said there? A false pilgrim might stumble on these questions, revealing their deception. The merchant was another common figure at medieval inns. Medieval trade depended on merchants who travelled from market to market, buying goods in one place and selling them in another. These merchants might be wealthy and well-connected, dealing in expensive commodities like spices, silk, or precious metals. Or they might be humble peddlers, carrying small loads of simple goods from village to village. Merchants travelled with their merchandise, which meant they needed secure storage at the inns where they stayed. A merchant's goods were their livelihood, and losing them to theft could mean financial ruin. Good inns provided locked storage rooms where merchants could secure their wares overnight. The inn might charge extra for this service, but merchants willingly paid for the peace of mind. Merchants also needed places to conduct business. The common room of an inn often served as an informal marketplace, where merchants displayed samples of their goods and negotiated with potential buyers. Local traders might come to the inn specifically to meet incoming merchants, knowing that new goods and new deals would be available. The inn was thus not just a place of rest, but a centre of economic activity. Soldiers were another group frequently encountered at medieval inns. The medieval period was one of frequent warfare, and armies moved constantly across the landscape. Individual soldiers might be travelling to join their units, returning home after a campaign, or carrying messages between military commanders. Groups of soldiers might be moving between garrison posts or pursuing enemies across the countryside. Soldiers posed special challenges for innkeepers. They were often rough, violent men, hardened by warfare, and accustomed to taking what they wanted by force. They might be unable or unwilling to pay for their lodging and food. They might start fights with other guests or harass the servants, and their presence might attract unwanted attention from local authorities. At the same time, soldiers could provide protection. An inn with a group of armed men staying overnight was safer from robbery or attack. A soldier might help break up a fight or intimidate troublemakers. The relationship between inns and soldiers was thus complicated, a mixture of wariness and mutual benefit. Government officials and messengers also travelled regularly, carrying orders and information between distant points. The medieval state depended on communication, and messengers were constantly moving along the roads, bringing news of taxes, laws, military movements, and official decisions. These travellers often carried documents sealed with royal or noble seals, and they could demand priority treatment at inns. Scholars and students were another travelling group, moving between the universities and cathedral schools that provided education in this era. Young men from across Europe travelled to Paris, Oxford, Bologna, and other centres of learning, often with little money but great ambition. These students might beg for their lodging or work for it, helping in the kitchen or stable in exchange for a bed and a meal. Entertainers also travelled the medieval roads, bringing music, storytelling, and performance to communities that had few other sources of amusement. Minstrels, jugglers, actors, and acrobats moved from town to town, performing at markets, fairs, and noble households. At inns, they might perform in exchange for their keep, providing entertainment to guests in return for food and lodging. And there were many other types of travellers: craftsmen seeking work, refugees fleeing war or persecution, lovers eloping against their families' wishes, criminals fleeing justice, adventurers seeking fortune. The roads of medieval Europe carried an endless stream of humanity, each person with their own story, their own reasons for being in motion. This diversity made the medieval inn a fascinating place. In a single evening, you might share a table with a merchant from Flanders, a pilgrim returning from Rome, a soldier heading to war, a student travelling to Oxford, and a minstrel with songs from distant lands. You might hear stories of far-off places, learn news from other parts of the realm, discover opportunities for trade or employment. The inn was a window onto the wider world, a place where information and ideas circulated freely. This mixing of people from different backgrounds was unusual in medieval society, which was generally quite rigid in its social hierarchies. In most contexts, peasants associated with peasants, nobles with nobles, clergy with clergy, but the inn was one of the few places where these boundaries broke down, where the common need for shelter brought people together regardless of their station. Of course, the boundaries did not disappear entirely. A noble traveller would expect better accommodations than a common labourer. A wealthy merchant would receive more attentive service than a poor peddler. The innkeeper was skilled at reading the social status of guests and treating them accordingly. But even so, the common room represented a kind of temporary equality, a space where different kinds of people could share warmth and food and conversation. Let us imagine our traveller sitting in the common room, observing this parade of humanity. Here comes a group of pilgrims, their faces tired but content, fresh from visiting a local shrine. There sits a merchant, his fingers stained with the dyes he sells, calculating his profits in his head. Near the fire, a soldier tells war stories to anyone who will listen, his scars visible evidence of battles survived. A student argues philosophy with a priest, their voices rising in friendly debate. A minstrel tunes a stringed instrument, preparing to earn his supper with song. These people will never see each other again after tonight. Their paths will diverge in the morning, leading to destinations across the realm. But for this one evening, they share this space, this warmth, this moment in time. They are connected by the simple fact of being human, of needing shelter and food and rest. The medieval inn is a testament to this common humanity, a reminder that beneath all our differences, we are all travellers on the same journey. This is one of the beautiful aspects of medieval inn history. It shows us people at their most basic, stripped of pretension and ceremony, focused on the fundamental needs that unite us all. In the inn's common room, the great and the humble sat together, warmed by the same fire, eating from the same pot. This is a vision of human connection that transcends time and place. Let yourself be part of this gathering. Let yourself be one traveller among many, sharing the warmth of the fire, listening to the hum of conversation, feeling the deep tiredness that makes sleep so welcome. You are not alone. You are surrounded by fellow travellers, each with their own story, each seeking the same comfort you seek. The fire crackles. The voices murmur. The medieval night holds you gently. Rest now, traveller. The road will be there in the morning. But for now, you are home, the morning after and the road ahead. Dawn arrives slowly at the medieval inn. The sky lightens from black to grey to a pale, pearly luminescence as the sun approaches the horizon. Birds begin to sing outside the windows, their voices sharp and clear in the still morning air. The fire, which was banked overnight, is stirred back to life by an early rising servant. Fresh logs added to the glowing coals until flames begin to lick upward once more. This is the hour of transition, when the inn shifts from a place of rest to a place of preparation. The peace of the night is giving way to the activity of the coming day. Travellers are waking, stretching, gathering their belongings. Servants are beginning their endless round of tasks. The innkeeper is already at work, checking supplies, giving instructions, preparing for whatever this new day might bring. Our traveller wakes with the others, rising from the communal bed with a stiff back and a slightly fuzzy head. The night's sleep, though interrupted by snoring neighbours and unfamiliar sounds, has done its work. They feel restored, ready to face the road again. Their tired muscles have recovered somewhat. Their spirits have lifted. The fear and exhaustion of yesterday evening have given way to a cautious optimism about the day ahead. The morning routine at a medieval inn was brisk and efficient. Travellers were expected to rise promptly, gather their things, and make way for the cleaning that had to happen before the next wave of guests arrived. Those who lingered too long might find themselves gently but firmly encouraged to move along. The inn's business depended on turning over beds and tables as quickly as possible. Our traveller joins the queue for the morning wash. There is a basin near the door, filled with cold water from the well, where guests can splash their faces and hands before setting out. This is the extent of washing facilities for most travellers. A full bath, involving heated water and a tub, was a luxury available at some better establishments, but not at ordinary roadside inns. Medieval people were not as dirty as we sometimes imagine, but their standards of cleanliness were certainly different from ours. Breakfast is simple and quick. Bread and ale again, perhaps with a piece of cheese or cold meat for those who can afford it. The meal is taken standing or sitting briefly on a bench, gulped down quickly between preparations for departure. There is none of the leisurely dining that characterizes modern breakfasts. Time is precious, daylight is limited, and the road is waiting. As they eat, our traveller takes one last look around the common room that sheltered them through the night. The fire is burning brightly now, but the room looks different in daylight. Shabbier, perhaps. The smoke stains on the walls are more visible. The wear on the furniture is more apparent. The rushes on the floor look particularly tired and dirty in the revealing morning light. But there is also something beautiful about the room in this light. The sunbeams coming through the small windows catch the dust motes in the air, making them sparkle like tiny stars. The fire's warmth feels different in the morning, more energizing than sedating. The smell of fresh bread from the kitchen mingles with the residual smoke and ale smell, creating an oddly pleasant combination. Our traveller finishes their breakfast, settles their bill with the innkeeper, and prepares to depart. Their cloak, now dry, is wrapped around their shoulders. Their bag, repacked with their belongings, is slung over their shoulder. Their purse, somewhat lighter than when they arrived, is secured safely beneath their clothing. They are ready. The innkeeper wishes them safe travels. It is a standard farewell, spoken hundreds of times to hundreds of departing guests. But there is genuine warmth behind it. The innkeeper knows the dangers of the road. They have seen travellers arrive sick, injured, or robbed. They understand what their guests face out there in the wider world. The wish for safe travels is not empty words. It is a sincere hope that this person will reach their destination without harm. Our traveller steps out into the morning. The air is crisp and clean, washed by last night's rain. The mud of the courtyard squelches beneath their feet, but the sky is clear and the day promises to be fair. The road stretches away in both directions, leading to unknown destinations, unknown adventures, unknown challenges. For a moment, our traveller pauses at the gate, looking back at the inn. The building looks smaller in daylight, more ordinary. The ale stake hangs motionless in the still air. A thin stream of smoke rises from the chimney. Through a window, they can see the glow of the fire and the movement of figures within. This place sheltered them when they needed shelter. It fed them when they were hungry. It gave them warmth when they were cold and rest when they were exhausted. These are not small gifts. In a world full of danger and uncertainty, the medieval inn offered something precious: safety, comfort, and the fellowship of other travellers. Our traveller silently thanks the inn and all who work there, then turns to face the road ahead. The journey continues. The road rises and falls over gentle hills, winds through patches of forest, crosses streams on ancient stone bridges. Our traveller walks steadily, pacing themselves for the long day ahead. They are not alone on the road. Other travellers pass in both directions, some on foot like themselves, others on horseback, some driving carts laden with goods. As they walk, they reflect on their night at the inn. It was not glamorous or particularly comfortable by any standard. The bed was hard, the room was smoky, the company was uncertain, but it was enough. It was what they needed, and now, refreshed and fed, they can continue their journey with renewed strength. This is the fundamental rhythm of medieval travel. Walk until you can walk no more, then find shelter for the night. Rest, eat, sleep, then rise and walk again. Day after day, mile after mile, until finally you reach your destination. It was slow and arduous, but it was also simple and clear. You knew what you had to do, you did it, and eventually you arrived. Modern travel has lost this rhythm. We move so quickly that the journey itself disappears, becomes a mere transition between departure and arrival. We do not experience the road in the same way our ancestors did. We do not feel the gradual change of landscape, the slow accumulation of miles, the deep satisfaction of reaching shelter after a long day's walk. We have gained speed and comfort, but we have lost something too. This is one of the valuable lessons of this relaxing history documentary. It reminds us of another way of living, another way of moving through the world. Not necessarily a better way, but a different way, one that has its own qualities and virtues. The slowness of medieval travel forced people to be present, to pay attention, to notice the world around them. The difficulty of the journey made the destination more meaningful. The challenges faced along the way built resilience and appreciation for simple comforts. Our traveller does not think in these terms, of course. They simply walk, one foot in front of the other, covering ground, getting closer to wherever they are going. They are not philosophical about their journey. They are just living it, moment by moment, as people have always lived their lives. The sun climbs higher, the morning warms, the road continues. Our traveller walks on, leaving the inn further behind with each step, but carrying its gifts with them. The strength from last night's rest, the energy from this morning's breakfast, the memory of warmth and shelter in a cold world. And somewhere ahead, another inn awaits. Another fire, another meal, another bed shared with strangers. The cycle will repeat, as it has repeated countless times for countless travellers across the centuries. This is the eternal rhythm of the road, the ancient pattern of journey and rest, the fundamental human experience of moving through the world and finding shelter along the way. Let yourself feel this rhythm. Let yourself be carried by it, as our traveller is carried, as all travellers are carried. The road stretches on, the day advances, and somewhere ahead, rest waits. This is the promise that keeps travellers moving, the hope that sustains them through long miles and hard conditions. There will be an inn, there will be warmth, there will be rest. Close your eyes and walk with our traveller down the medieval road. Feel the earth beneath your feet. Smell the damp morning air. Hear the birds singing in the trees. This is the world as it was, the world of our ancestors, the world that still exists in some form beneath the surface of our modern lives. Rest in this walk. Find peace in this movement. The journey continues, but you are safe. The road will carry you where you need to go. Seasons of the road. The experience of staying at a medieval inn varied greatly depending on the time of year. The changing seasons transformed not just the landscape through which travellers moved, but the very nature of their journey and the quality of their rest. Let us explore how the passing of the year affected life at the medieval inn. Spring brought relief to travellers after the hardships of winter. The days grew longer, providing more hours of precious daylight for safe travel. The roads, while still muddy from melting snow and spring rains, became passable once more after months when travel was difficult or impossible. Streams that had been frozen solid began to flow again, providing fresh water for travellers and their animals. The spring inn was a place of renewal. The innkeeper would undertake major cleaning after the close quarters of winter. Old rushes would be swept out entirely and replaced with fresh ones. Bedding would be aired and cleaned, the straw in mattresses replaced. Accumulated soot would be scrubbed from walls and ceilings. Windows and doors would be opened wide to let the fresh spring air flow through rooms that had been closed and smoky all winter. The food at spring inns reflected the season's scarcity and hope. Winter stores of preserved vegetables and salted meat were running low, but fresh greens were beginning to appear. The first herbs pushed up in kitchen gardens. Early vegetables like leeks and wild garlic added freshness to the eternal pottage. Eggs became more plentiful as hens responded to the lengthening days. There was a sense of anticipation at spring inns, a feeling that abundance was coming even if it had not quite arrived. Travellers in spring often spoke of relief and gratitude. They had survived the winter, that most dangerous season. They could move again, could resume journeys interrupted by cold and snow. The spring roads were crowded with merchants eager to reach distant markets, pilgrims setting out for shrines, messengers carrying news accumulated over months of isolation. After the enforced stillness of winter, the world was in motion again. Summer was the season of easiest travel. The long days allowed for many hours of walking or riding. The roads were dry and firm, making progress swift. The weather, though sometimes too hot, was generally favourable. Travellers could sleep outdoors if no inn was available, wrapping themselves in cloaks under the open sky. The summer inn was a busy place, crowded with travellers taking advantage of the favourable conditions. Rooms that had been half empty in winter were now filled to capacity. The courtyard bustled with horses and carts. The common room rang with voices speaking many dialects, as travellers from distant places mingled on the summer roads. Food was abundant in summer. Fresh vegetables and fruits were available from local farms and the inn's own garden. Meat was plentiful, as animals fattened on summer grazing. Fresh milk and cheese appeared on tables. The pottage was enriched with beans and peas at the height of their season. Summer was a time of relative plenty, when even modest inns could offer varied and satisfying meals. But summer travel had its challenges. The heat could be oppressive, and travellers might arrive at inns exhausted and dehydrated after walking through the midday sun. Insects were abundant, filling the air with their buzzing and biting anyone who sat still too long. The crowded conditions at summer inns meant less personal space, more noise, more competition for beds and tables. And disease spread more easily in the warm months, as contaminated food spoiled quickly and stagnant water bred illness. Autumn brought a different character to travel and to the medieval inn. The days shortened, creating urgency in those who still needed to complete journeys before winter closed the roads. The weather grew unpredictable, with sunny days giving way suddenly to cold rain. Leaves fell from trees, covering the roads with their slippery carpet. The first frosts appeared, warning of the cold to come. The autumn inn was a place of transition. The innkeeper was beginning to prepare for winter, laying in supplies of preserved food, stocking firewood, making repairs that would be impossible in the cold months. Travellers were more anxious than in summer, hurrying to complete their business before conditions deteriorated. There was a sense of ending, of the year winding down, of the great cycle turning toward its darkest point. Food in autumn was dominated by harvest, abundance and preservation. Fresh apples and pears, root vegetables pulled from the earth, grains threshed and milled into flour, but also salting, smoking and pickling, as the innkeeper preserved as much as possible for the lean months ahead. The autumn pottage was thick and rich, heavy with turnips and cabbages that would store well through winter. Winter was the hardest season for travel and for inns. The days were short, providing only a few hours of safe travel. The roads were often impassable, blocked by snow, turned to frozen ruts hidden beneath drifts. The cold was a constant threat, capable of killing unprotected travellers. Only those with urgent business ventured out in the depths of winter. The winter inn was a place of refuge against the hostile world outside. The fire burned constantly, consuming enormous quantities of wood to push back the cold. Guests crowded close to the hearth, reluctant to move far from its warmth. The windows were shuttered tight, making the common room darker and more enclosed. There was an intimacy to winter evenings at the inn, a closeness born of shared vulnerability. Food in winter was preserved food. Salted meat and fish, dried peas and beans, root vegetables from the cellar, hard bread that could be softened in broth. Fresh food was rare and expensive. The pottage was thinner than in summer, stretched to feed guests from limited supplies. Meat was a luxury, saved for special occasions or wealthy travellers who could pay premium prices. Travellers in winter were few but determined. They had reasons compelling enough to brave the dangers of the season. Important messages, urgent business, family emergencies, the demands of war. These travellers arrived at inns half frozen, desperate for warmth, willing to pay almost any price for shelter. The Winter Inn was both a commercial enterprise and a life-saving service, the difference between survival and death for those who found its door. The innkeeper's challenge in winter was maintaining operations with reduced income and increased expenses. Fewer travellers meant less revenue, but the fire still needed fuel, the servants still needed food, the building still needed maintenance. Many inns survived winter by serving more local customers, becoming the social centre of the community when travel was impossible, relying on regular income from nearby residents who sought warmth and company during the dark months. This seasonal rhythm shaped all of medieval life, not just travel and inns. People lived more closely attuned to the natural year than we do today. They felt the turning of seasons in their bodies, in their work, in their food, in their very thoughts. The medieval inn, sitting at the crossroads of human movement, reflected these seasonal changes with particular clarity. Let yourself feel these seasons as you rest. Spring's fresh promise, summer's abundant ease, autumn's urgent preparations, winter's deep stillness. These are the rhythms of our planet, the great cycles that have governed life for millions of years. We have insulated ourselves from these rhythms with electric light and central heating and global supply chains. But they are still there, beneath the surface, still shaping our world in ways we barely notice. The medieval traveller knew these seasons intimately. Their life depended on understanding them, on knowing when to travel and when to stay put, when to push forward and when to seek shelter. This knowledge was not intellectual. It was felt in the bones, learned through experience, passed down through generations. It was the practical wisdom of people who lived close to the earth and its cycles. As you drift towards sleep, let these seasons carry you. Feel the warmth of summer sun, the crispness of autumn air, the bite of winter cold, the soft promise of spring. These are the eternal rhythms, unchanged since humans first walked the earth. They connect you to your ancestors, to all the travellers who ever sought shelter from the elements, to the deep continuity of human experience across time. The seasons turn. The years pass. The medieval inn remains, a point of stability in a changing world, offering the same simple comforts year after year, century after century. Warmth, food, shelter, rest. These are the gifts that do not change, the needs that connect us all. Rest now in this timeless rhythm. Let the seasons rock you gently, like a boat on slow waves. The night is deep, wherever you are. The old comforts still hold their power. Sleep, traveller. Tomorrow will come, with whatever season it brings. The legacy of the medieval inn. We have journeyed far together through the world of the medieval inn. We have approached through the gathering darkness, watched by the ale stake swinging in the evening breeze. We have entered the smoky common room and taken our place by the fire. We have eaten bread and pottage, drunk weak ale, and listened to the murmur of voices around us. We have climbed the creaking stairs and found our place in the communal bed, falling asleep to the sound of snoring strangers and howling wind. We have met the innkeeper and the servants who kept the establishment running. We have observed the rules that maintained order among diverse guests. We have watched merchants, pilgrims, soldiers, and scholars pass through these doors, each with their own story. We have heard the sounds of the medieval night and felt the rhythm of the seasons turning. Now, as our journey draws to a close, let us consider what the medieval inn means for us today. What can we learn from this humble institution? What wisdom does it offer across the centuries? The first lesson is the importance of shelter. We take shelter for granted today, but for most of human history, it was precious and uncertain. The medieval traveller knew what it meant to be exposed to the elements, vulnerable to cold and rain and danger. The inn offered protection from all of these threats. It was a haven, a sanctuary, a place where the hostile world could be kept at bay for a few hours. This basic function of shelter remains important even in our modern world. We still need places of safety and comfort. We still need refuges from the storms of life. The homes we create, the communities we build, the institutions we maintain, all serve this ancient purpose. We are still seeking what the medieval traveller sought when they pushed open the inn door and stepped into the warmth. The second lesson is the power of simple comforts. The medieval inn offered nothing fancy. A fire, some food, a place to sleep. These were basic provisions, the minimum necessary for survival, yet they were enough. They were, in fact, everything that mattered to a tired and frightened traveller. We live in a world of endless options and constant stimulation. We are surrounded by luxuries that would have astonished medieval people. Yet we often feel unsatisfied, restless, always wanting more. The medieval inn reminds us that simple things can be sufficient. A warm room, a full belly, a safe bed. These are not small pleasures. They are the foundation of human well-being. The third lesson is the value of community. The medieval inn brought strangers together, forcing them to share space and resources. This was not always comfortable, but it was deeply human. We are social creatures, evolved to live in groups. The enforced closeness of the medieval inn, however challenging, reflected this basic truth about our nature. Modern life often isolates us from each other. We live in private homes, travel in private vehicles, stare at private screens. We have gained privacy and autonomy, but we have lost some of the casual, constant contact that characterized traditional communities. The medieval inn reminds us of what we have given up and suggests that we might seek more connection in our modern lives. The fourth lesson is the continuity of human experience. The medieval traveller who sought shelter at an inn was not so different from us. They felt cold, hunger, fatigue, fear. They craved warmth, food, rest, safety. They loved and worried and hoped and dreamed. The details of their lives were different from ours, but the fundamentals were the same. This continuity is comforting. It reminds us that we are not alone in history, not isolated in our particular moment. We are part of a long chain of human experience, stretching back through countless generations. The problems we face, the needs we feel, the joys we seek, all of these connect us to our ancestors. We walk the same roads they walked, metaphorically if not literally. We seek the same shelters, we find the same rest. The fifth lesson is the impermanence of everything. The medieval inns that once lined the roads of Europe are mostly gone now. A few survive as historic buildings, museums, or functioning hotels trading on their ancient heritage. But most have crumbled into ruins, been demolished, been replaced by other buildings serving other purposes. The travellers who slept there are long dead, their names forgotten, their stories lost. This impermanence applies to our own world as well. The places we know, the institutions we rely on, the comforts we take for granted, all of these will eventually pass away. This is not a reason for despair. It is simply the truth of existence. Understanding it can help us appreciate what we have while we have it, to find meaning in the transient joys of our brief lives. The medieval inn, then, is not just a subject for this sleep documentary or a curiosity of medieval daily life. It is a window into universal human experiences. It shows us our ancestors at their most ordinary and their most human. It reminds us of what matters most when everything else is stripped away. As you prepare for sleep, carry these lessons with you. Remember the weary traveller pushing open the inn door, stepping from darkness into light, from cold into warmth, from danger into safety. Remember the simple gratitude they felt for fire and food and shelter. Remember the community of strangers who shared the night together, connected by their common humanity. You are part of this story. Your life, however different from the medieval travelers, is part of the same great human journey. You face the same basic challenges. You seek the same basic comforts. And someday, your story will join the countless stories that have come before, part of the endless stream of human experience flowing through time. But that is a thought for another day. For now, you need only rest. Let the medieval inn fade from your mind, but let its peace remain with you. Let the crackle of the fire follow you into sleep. Let the warmth of the common room wrap around you like a blanket. Let the knowledge that shelter exists, that comfort is possible, that you are not alone, carry you gently into dreams. The medieval inn is closed now. The fire has gone out. The travellers have departed. But somewhere, in some form, the old hospitality continues. Wherever there is warmth offered to the cold, food offered to the hungry, shelter offered to the exposed, the spirit of the medieval inn lives on. It is one of humanity's oldest traditions, and it will endure as long as humans need each other. Sleep well, traveller. You have journeyed far tonight, through time and space and imagination. Now it is time to rest. The road will be there tomorrow, with all its challenges and opportunities. But for now, you are safe. You are warm. You are at peace. The night deepens around you. The silence grows. And somewhere in the darkness, an old inn waits, its door always open, its fire always ready, for any traveller who needs its simple, ancient gifts. Rest now. Sleep well. And may your dreams be peaceful journeys to distant places. Closing moments. The candle gutters and fades. The fire settles into glowing coals. Outside, the wind has died down, leaving only silence and stars. The medieval inn rests in darkness, waiting for the dawn that will come as it always comes, slowly and gently, painting the sky with soft colours. This has been a journey through boring history for sleep, a gentle exploration of ordinary life in an extraordinary time. We have walked the muddy roads of medieval Europe. We have sought shelter from the cold and dark. We have found it, as countless travellers found it, in the humble roadside inn. The medieval inn was not glamorous. It was smoky and crowded and sometimes dangerous. The beds were hard, the food was plain, and privacy was non-existent. Yet, it served a vital function. It allowed people to move through a dangerous world with some hope of safety. It connected communities and facilitated trade. It provided the infrastructure for pilgrimage and government and all the activities that required travel. More than that, it provided comfort. Simple, basic, human comfort. A fire against the cold, food against the hunger, shelter against the dark. These are the things that matter most when everything else is stripped away. The medieval inn understood this truth and built its entire existence around providing these essential things. We have much to learn from this understanding. In our world of endless complexity, we sometimes forget the power of simple things. We chase elaborate pleasures while neglecting basic needs. We seek exotic experiences while missing the wonder of ordinary life. The medieval inn reminds us to appreciate what is fundamental, to find joy in warmth and food and rest, to recognize that these simple gifts are precious beyond measure. As you drift towards sleep, let the medieval inn be your guide. Let it teach you to appreciate shelter, to value simple comforts, to feel connected to the long line of humanity that stretches behind you. Let it remind you that you are not alone, that others have faced darkness and found light, that the human capacity for hospitality and care has sustained our species through countless generations. The fire has burned down to embers now. The common room is empty. The sleeping chamber is quiet, filled only with the sound of breathing. The medieval night holds the inn in its gentle embrace, as it has held countless nights before, as it will hold countless nights to come. This is the end of our journey together, but it is not really an end. The story of the medieval inn continues in every hotel and hostel, every guest room and shelter, every place where strangers are welcomed and travellers find rest. The ancient tradition of hospitality lives on, transformed but unbroken, still offering the same essential gifts that it offered 1,000 years ago. So close your eyes, traveller. Let sleep take you where it will, and know that wherever you go in your dreams, there will be an inn waiting for you somewhere. A fire will be burning, a door will be open, a voice will say welcome. That is the promise of hospitality, as old as humanity itself. That is the gift of the medieval inn, reaching across centuries to offer you comfort in this moment, on this night, wherever you are. Sleep well, sleep deeply, and may you wake refreshed, ready for whatever journeys await you. The ale stake sways gently in the darkness. The smoke rises to the stars. The medieval inn keeps its ancient vigil, watching over travellers who passed long ago and travellers who are yet to come. And somewhere, softly, a fire crackles. A door opens. A weary traveller steps in from the cold. The story goes on. It always does. It always will. Good night.